Now we're going to be chatting to a vet who has over 50 years experience of treating many different kinds of animals. Welcome to the show, James Alexander.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too. Where did it all start for you then? Because I read that you were inspired by the famous James Herriot.
Well, I suppose it started when I was about maybe 6 or 8, and I got a book from an uncle who was very keen on animals, and he inspired me just to have an interest in animals and birds and plants and such like. But when I was 9, I had the good fortune to live on a farm in Yorkshire, in a cottage on a farm, and I used to, as a schoolboy, help in inverted commas the farmer with all these daily chores. And one day there was an operation on a piglet that was needed, and the vet came along to do the operation on the piglet, and I helped in inverted commas, as some layperson could only do. I won't go into the graphic details of what I was holding, but it's part of the piglet's male bits. Okay. as he operated on it, and I didn't know at the time, but it turned out that was James Herriot. Of course, he wasn't James Herriot at that point; he was just Alf White. But certainly from that age onwards, I was involved with the cows and the pigs on the farm, and I just wanted to be a vet, I suppose, and never wanted to be anything else from that time forward. I was fortunate enough to go and spend some time in the practice when I was a schoolboy, about 13 or 14, and met the famous Siegfried and all the rest of the practice. I can still remember Siegfried grabbing me by my ear and dragging me down the corridor and saying, "Oh, you're the new boy, we'll find something for you to do, you see." I was probably both very shy and terrified, but anyway, to cut a long story short, I eventually became a veterinary student, and in my final year, I went back to the practice in Thirsk and spent some time with James Herriot and Siegfried, who was still not James Herriot, he was still Alf White. And one of the perhaps interesting things was on my last day there, I went and looked for a gift for the lady that was my landlady. I'd been staying there for a month with her, and I saw this picture of James Herriot in a local bookshop, and I thought, well, that's not James Herriot, that's Alf White, and realised he'd written a book. So I bought the book and went back to the surgery at lunchtime in a brown paper packet, as everything was in those days, no plastic, and Alf White said to me, "Oh, you bought something, you bought a book, have you bought a book?" "Oh, let me have a look at it. I'm really interested in books." So he put his hand in my pocket and pulled the book out and said, "Oh, you bought my book, you bought my book." And he danced around the surgery with this book. "You see, you bought my book. Who's it for?" And I told him who it was for. He said, "Well, I'll need to write something in it, because that's what real authors do." And then he wrote an inscription in it and blotted it with his blotting paper, because it was a fountain pen in those days. And then he ran round the surgery again saying, I've done it. He said, "I have written a book, I have sold a book, and I've signed a book. That's what real authors do. And if I never sell another one, it doesn't matter." And the rest of it, of course, is history. But that is absolutely true. If I never sell another one, it doesn't matter. I've done it.
And he probably had no idea how huge you would become.
Not at all. No, he's a very, very humble person.
Well, you mentioned Thirsk and obviously Yorkshire, but this is clearly not a Yorkshire accent you have. So are you in Scotland now?
I'm in Scotland. I am Scottish by birth. It just happened that my father moved down to England with his job, and spent most of my school time in England, and then moved back up to Scotland to go to university, and then stayed in Scotland ever since. So most of my working life has been up in Scotland, either in the Highlands of Scotland or in the central area.
Ooh, nice and cold then.
Well, it's different to what you're experiencing in Spain.
Yeah, just slightly. So what was it like back then being a student? I mean, things have obviously changed over 50 years within the practice, but even learning how to become a vet, presumably that's changed over the years.
Yes, it has. I suppose in those days it was slightly easier in some ways because there were less veterinary students about. I mean, the yearly intake was probably only about 40, 45 in each university, and now they're talking about 160 or 200 students in a year. So they all have to find vets to go around with when they're students. And in my day, it was quite easy to find a vet, and they were all quite keen to show you and help you, let you do things. Now life has changed quite a lot. There are a lot of referral veterinary practices and quite kind of what we might call highfalutin veterinary practices, where they have a lot of expertise and the students don't get to do anything because quite naturally they aren't skilled and they just become onlookers rather than partakers of what's going on. So from that point of view, life has changed. And of course, the other thing was in those days, the equipment was very rudimentary. We had glass syringes and needles that had to be boiled up between every visit and sterilised, whereas now everything comes in pre-sterilised packets with disposable needles and disposable syringes and a huge array of antibiotics and other drugs that weren't available then.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I was reading that you were fortunate, it says here in the press release, you were fortunate to live through the era where vets had to be omnicompetent in the treatment of all species. I would imagine that a vet should be omnicompetent anyway, or has it changed because of things like computers?
No, I think vets still have to be omnicompetent, but I suppose in those days you were almost pushed out in a car with a boot full of drugs and were told to go on and get on with it, and you had to deal with everything that you met. I think nowadays people tend to veer towards either dealing with mainly dogs and cats or exotic animals or mainly large farm animals, although they're trained in everything in their courses. They don't tend to see every type of animal in their daily life, which I suppose I was fortunate to do.
Yeah. Have you had to treat exotic animals?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I spent about the last 25 years lecturing at one of the veterinary colleges on exotic animals and treating them, snakes, lizards, birds of prey, parrots, you name it.
You name it, you've got it. And,
more or less.
What would your normal day have been like? Would it be dogs and cats or would it be farm animals?
Well, very, very originally, I think it was mainly farm animals with dogs and cats at the evening surgery. But as life changes for everybody and time goes on, the emphasis became more dogs and cats. And then, of course, in with the dogs and cats came the snakes and the parrots and the birds of prey. And then eventually, the last number of years, really, I saw very few dogs and cats, and it was mainly what are now termed exotic animals. And because there weren't too many exotic vets in this part of the world, we got lots of referrals from other vets. So we'd get people trekking from all over the country with sick birds and sick snakes and things like that needed treatment.
And I would imagine, James, it's a bit of a dichotomy. I mean, you must have the rewards and the satisfaction of a successful outcome with an animal. Then on the other hand, the sadness of end-of-life scenarios and the hardships, particularly working on farms in the weather conditions in the Highlands of Scotland.
Yes, some of those perhaps better not remembered, but there are times where you were so cold that you could not feel your fingers, you could not get your buttons on your coats undone or the ignition, the keys in the ignition in your car to start the car move because your fingers were so frozen. So yeah, there were some hardships, but there were very enjoyable times as well because the farmers were nice. You had what was called a good crack with them, and that kept the enjoyment going and the fun, if you can call it that, of standing getting frozen by the side of a cattle crush for 4 or 5 hours in driving snow or sleet or rain.
Blimey.
But it I don't know, it had its compensations, but you talked about the sadnesses of end of life. Everybody thinks it must be awful to be a vet and have to put things to sleep. And, if you're putting things to sleep for the right reason, then it isn't sad because you're relieving suffering, you're relieving pain, you're doing things that are necessary. Excuse me. But the real sadness, I think the emotional sadness from my point of view, is when we sometimes get like an old person coming, an old man, for instance, that lost his wife, not many family to be related to, and he had his only companion, which is his old dog, and he'd have to have that put to sleep. And that was really, really sad, because these chaps would try and be so brave, but you knew that they were just cut up inside, and it actually, affected you as well, because that was their last living friend that was gone.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that was the emotional bit, but I'm not going to say nobody was cavalier about putting animals to sleep. If you do it in the right situation for the right reasons, then it's just something that has to be done.
Yeah, you're not only taking care of the animals, but you're taking care of the humans as well,
right.
aren't you?
That's right. A lot of it was taking care of people, and you wouldn't believe how many people would come in and ask about their medical problems, not because they were pretending to be doctors, but because they were frightened to ask their own doctors because they felt they were unapproachable. So that was great.
Can always trust a vet.
Well, something like that. But I suppose they knew you, and they'd had personal relationships with you. And could you just read this report and tell me what it means? Oh, I didn't ask him.
And I suppose it is similar, apart from the anatomy. It is similar to being a doctor, isn't it? Similar training.
Yeah, very, very, very similar, and very fortunate that to be a vet, you're a surgeon as well as a physician. You're an anaesthetist. You're a radiographer. You're everything.
Yeah.
Even the cleaner-upper sometimes.
Never a dull moment.
No.
And of course, the other thing that has changed over the years is the phones, because people must have had to have sometimes gone to a phone box maybe, or phoned from their homes. But now everything's in your pocket, isn't it? You've got mobile phones nowadays.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, people have had to walk across fields to get to the nearest phone box to phone you, and even the communications on your rounds are different, because we used to set off with a bag of 2-pence coins in the days when there were phone boxes, and when you got to the end of your round in the morning, you phoned back to the surgery. That was what the 2 pence was for, to see whether there's any new calls had come in, and that was the only way of communicating. And then, of course, radio telephones came in, and then mobile phones, of course, now. So life's changed completely from that point of view.
Yeah.
You're also more accessible. I'm not saying that you would go and sit in a lay-by and do nothing, but at least if you didn't have a phone, you weren't traceable.
Yeah, that's true. And are you still doing it, James, or have you retired now?
I officially retired, but the only work I get involved in now is voluntary work for some cruelty cases and such like for the SPCA.
Oh, and of course you're now an author as well.
Well, apparently.
It sounds like a really interesting book to me.
Well, I hope it's of interest to people from many points of view. It's a bit hopefully self-deprecating. I mean, it sounds as though you spend your life getting kicked and bitten and scratched, but that's not the reality of it. It's just the things that you pick out to write about. Hopefully, have a bit of a humorous content, a bit of a serious content. And most things go straightforward, but sometimes they could be either exciting or dangerous.
Yeah. Well, if any of our listeners want to get an insight into the life of a vet for 50 odd years, the book, we are selling it on our website. It's called Animal and Client Encounters, and it's by James Alexander, who we're chatting to now. James, I thank you very much for your time, and it's been an interesting conversation. I'm a big animal lover, so it's been great to chat to you.
Good. Thank you very much.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.